All
It was a
right.
struggle for me to get on for whatever reason.
What was your struggle? Was it just,
It kept sending me in circles. But I'm here.
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
All right, everyone, good evening. Hope you all had a good August. I just wanted to first inform you all this meeting is being recorded. We will eventually post the recording on YouTube, which we'll then email out to everybody and post on our website. And I'd like to remind everyone, when you aren't the active speaker, if you could please mute your microphone. It'll help cut back on any kind of crosstalk, echoes, feedback, and whatnot.
Brian, can you speak up a little bit? You're a little soft.
Yeah, sure. Is this better?
Thanks. Yeah, that's better.
So
Commissioner Olfolder, we can kind of hear you moving around. Do you mind
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot.
muting? That's all right. Thanks.
So I want to start off the meeting just going over the agenda very quickly. You all should have received it by email prior to tonight's meeting. It was also posted on the webpage. So we'll begin as we always do by going over the administrative items, which as usual is the adoption of the last meeting's summary. We'll then have a very brief 5-minute period for public comment on the plan amendment study, which will supplement with a longer comment and Q&A session at the end of the meeting for members of the public. And after that, I'll give the task force a presentation explaining the plan amendment study process, summarizing the contents of the existing West Falls Church Transit Station Area Plan that are subject to the plan amendment, and providing some examples of how they may be amended. And then Evan from EYA will present an updated concept to the task force with a focus on particularly on parks and open space for the Lamada tract, which will follow with task force comments, questions, and discussion, concluding with the final public Q&A and comment session. And David, as you and I discussed, and as you said in your email, we can discuss the matter that Stephanie had emailed the task force about in between the public comment and the comprehensive plan amendment.
Right.
So with that, David, I'll turn it over to you to take care of the adoption of the July meeting minutes.
You want me to do that? Okay, that's all right. Did you got comments on those, right? Did you? I know I sent some
I did.
typos in.
Yeah, I received a few comments which I incorporated, and I sent out to the task force an updated copy of the minutes this morning.
Oh, okay. Was that with the updated agenda that you sent?
It was.
Okay, I don't think I looked at it again, but I will assume that everybody did. Does anybody on the task force have any comments on the minutes or any further modifications you would make? I'm trying to remember how I see if anybody's got hands up or anything here. How do I see that?
If you put your cursor in the middle of the screen, there should be a participants window
Yes.
that has a little silhouette of a person with the 3 bars.
Yeah, I see that, but it's open already.
Yeah, there's nobody with their hands currently raised. It would show next to
How
their
do I actually see the list of panelists on the right? I've got panelists, but how do I open that up to see them or to see hands?
If you press the arrow next to panelists, it'll then point down.
Oh, got it. Okay, got it. Thank you. All right, so I guess there are no hands up. So do we need a motion to approve these? I don't know if we need to or not. I'll make a motion to approve the minutes then.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor? Well,
Aye.
why don't we put it like this? We'll avoid votes. Is there anybody opposed or abstaining? Then all right, then I will take that as being there are 8 of us here, unless somebody else is joining. Approved by the task force unanimously, 8-0. It looks like. Okay, you want to move on, Brian, or
Yeah,
Oh,
sure.
Holly.
Sorry, I was just checking to see if any of the other task force members had accidentally joined as attendees.
I see. Okay,
No.
I see that Holly has just joined us as.
I finally managed it. I was on the
okay, so
wrong,
now
I was
we're-
on the big computer and I had to switch, so
Okay. Well, you didn't miss much. We just approved the minutes. That's all.
I know. And I just finished reading them later this afternoon, so I
Okay.
agree. It's fine.
As far as I can tell, and Jay, I see that Jay is on now too. So we have a full task force now.
All right, perfect. And then we can move on to the 5-minute public comment period. If any members of the public that are attendees have comments they'd like to make on the plan amendment study, please raise your hand. You can do so by pressing the participants window. It should be at the bottom of your video. It looks like a silhouette of a person with 3 horizontal bars. If you press that, and then on the bottom of the participant screen, there is a small square icon with a hand. And you can raise your hand and we can recognize you to speak.
I'm going to ask you to do that, Brian, because I'm having a hard time with these screens seeing, opening participant things.
I am looking at the list of participants right now. I'm not seeing any hands raised yet. All right, I'm still not seeing any hands raised. Well, sorry, Nancy, here I am here to unmute you. You may go ahead and speak.
Okay. Oh, okay. Hi. I actually have a neighbor. This is my first meeting, so I thought my neighbor would be asking these questions. But she was asking, we're mostly concerned about traffic. Is there a traffic study for the surrounding neighborhoods for this development? Because we're already really being used, our neighborhood streets where kids are walking to school and people are walking their dogs, they're already being used as cut-throughs by people with Waze and Google Maps. And it's really a pretty bad problem already. We don't have sidewalks, most of us. We have very narrow 1940s roads that don't really have more than 1 lane. Cars are already weaving through and pedestrians are on the street. So if there's, I believe, with this development, we'll get a lot of, there's a lot of money coming in for this project and we know that it'll be a boost to the economy, but we think that we shouldn't have to suffer in the nearby area. And so hopefully there will be sidewalks and traffic calming and things to divert the traffic from roads that are more appropriate, back to roads that are more appropriate. And then she was also going to ask about bike lanes. So that's the... I think someone's speaking, but I can't hear her. I'm not sure if I'm...
I am not sure.
Holly?
Holly, were you trying to speak?
No,
No. Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
I'm just thinking out loud. No.
Paul, if you could just mute yourself when you're not,
Yeah.
maybe that's fine.
Bob or Kevin, I don't know if you wanted to.
Yeah, hi, this is Bob Pecora with Fairfax County Department of Transportation. Nancy, if you let us know which streets you're on, I can ask you about what kinds of study, or talk to you about the studies and such. But in general, this project, the Lamada and Lamada, West Falls Church, Metro Station, and the Virginia Tech sites, they have prepared a traffic impact analysis study, and they submitted that to VDOT yesterday.
Oh,
and
nice.
to the county also yesterday. Yesterday we got a copy of it, so it's in for review. Your comments about bikes and sidewalks and such. With the comp plan amendment, we'll be making recommendations for bicycle and pedestrian circulation. As far as where these facilities may go, depends. as we do our analysis. I don't know what streets you live on, so if you're experiencing cut-through traffic and such, there is a program with the county called the Residential Traffic Administration Program. So if you're experiencing things like that today, that's a process that you can work with the supervisor's office to write a letter to the supervisor or contact them, and they could initiate a residential traffic study for that particular street. So if you're experiencing things like cut through or speeding or such like that, then a separate wing of the Fairfax County Department of Transportation can go out in field if the supervisor says, "Hey, let's go out and do that study," then our staff can go out there and do that. So there's a couple of neighborhoods that have already asked for that in around this project area. So there's a few ongoing traffic studies happening right now, or they're in various stages of being studied. So
Yeah, well, it's the neighborhoods near Haycock, between Westmoreland and Great Falls. Westmoreland and Great Falls are so backed up on any given day. Even now during COVID, it's amazing how many cars, and they're traffic cutting between the major developments in our area. Tyson's, this development. There's another project in Falls Church, downtown McLean, Arlington. I mean, it's just everywhere, and our roads can't accommodate what's there.
Right.
And we have schools and Little League and all these other facilities along these
Sure.
streets. We don't want them to become thoroughfares. So
yeah, so I don't know if there's any traffic studies happening between those streets yet, but that's something you can contact the supervisor's office. That's Supervisor Faust's office.
okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Oh,
Thanks,
sorry, I
guys.
didn't mean to cut you off. If you had any other advice, I'll take it. Otherwise,
Continue listening to this conversation tonight. There's going to be, I'm sure there's going to be other conversations about transportation tonight.
great. Thanks.
You're
Thanks,
welcome.
Nancy. Thanks, Bob. I think we have time for one more brief comment, and like I said, we'll have an additional longer public Q&A and comment session at the end. Of the
I see that Brian Robin has her hand up.
All right, Robin?
Hi. Yes, thank you. This is Robin Hohen. I'm with the Lemon Road Civic Association. And I don't know if I'm preempting the discussion, but we did have a question about the transportation. I believe Stephanie had raised this. We have a very crowded intersection at Route 7 and Idlewood Road. Stephanie Castelli sent to the task force a scan that shows that a VDOT study that was conducted in 2015 shows an already congested intersection with failing levels of service. Those levels of service are projected to fail by 2030. And that was, since this study was done in 2015, did not take into account the development that we are currently discussing. The existed VDOT productions, if we have greater density that's going to take place in this development, we are very concerned that the levels of service will decline and deteriorate before 2030.
Excuse me, might I interrupt a second, Robin?
Sure.
This is David. In fact, that is exactly the next thing we were going to talk about as soon as we finished with the public participants. I was wondering if I see there's one other person with a hand up, Christopher Caro. Brian, do we have time to deal with that first? Because Robin, we'll get right back into what you're talking about. We've gone back and forth on this, and we decided to schedule a discussion of that right after this session.
Okay.
Brian, can we call on somebody else, or are we out of time?
We're a little over 5 minutes already, but I think we have time for maybe a brief comment.
So Chris, we'll take yours if you can be brief, though.
Chris, you're unmuted.
Going.
Chris, are you able to? You're unmuted. Can you hear us?
I'm sorry. Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Sorry about that. Just a quick question about those neighborhood traffic studies that you guys were responding to Nancy about. I know one was done for my neighborhood right around Highland Avenue, which is a major thoroughfare for cut through traffic, and the results were totally bogus based on what I can literally stand on the corner of the street for 5 minutes and count. And so I guess I was just kind of curious, the accuracy of these counts and studies, do we have the opportunity to kind of call those into question before plans are made and moved forward with that aren't based on accurate data?
So Chris, this is Bob Pecora again. I was on that conversation yesterday morning about the Highland Avenue. Is that the meeting you were talking about?
Yeah, unfortunately, I was not part of that meeting. I only heard the results and was just kind of flabbergasted by the low numbers that they were giving for rush hour traffic.
Okay, so what you can do is you can talk with the task force, your neighborhood task force on that, or you can contact the RTAP program staff, which is Steve Knudsen, and I can pass that information from. Well, I believe the task force has Steve Knudsen's contact information. You can talk with him about that. The that RTAP program did identify a speed hump somewhere on Highland Avenue, and it's up to the neighborhood to take the next steps as far as hold a community meeting and discuss the option for that mitigation. If there's still questions about the analysis, I would recommend you talk with the RTAP staff, and they can explain the methodology that they used for studying the traffic on Highland Avenue and the criteria that they need to follow. So.
Okay, yeah, because I guess the other question is, because this obviously the development's going to drive yet further traffic numbers. What kind of proffers is the county going to seek to achieve from these developers to put in sidewalks on both sides of the streets? Because like a lot of the streets in this area either don't have sidewalks or they're just on one side. And so pedestrian issues plus kids dropped off school buses, it's incredibly dangerous.
So on the comp plan side of it, there'll be recommendations for bike ped and circulation regarding the comp plan amendment. Proffers are related more to a zoning case, and that gets into detail after this comp plan is approved. So that's at a later stage. The project site may not actually do anything on Highland Avenue, but they look at the surrounding neighborhoods as part of their traffic study. We are going to put together a bike and ped plan for the area as well. That's something that's coming with the comp plan amendment. And we're looking at the surrounding areas, not just on site at Lamada, Virginia Tech.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate that, just because obviously, as Nancy so eloquently put it, we're all going to kind of pay the price for the increased, socioeconomic benefits that the area will theoretically achieve from this development. It would just kind of be a bummer to not actually benefit ourselves as well more directly.
Right.
And just be safer.
Before we sign up, Chris, I'm sorry, where do you live? What?
I live on a pipe stem off of Highland Avenue.
Which street?
It's Highland Terrace.
All right. Okay. Of course. You're in my civic association. So
yes,
I'm David Ware. I'm also president of the association. So you would have gotten emails from me, including today, probably about this meeting. Why don't you just send me an email with what you want, and I'll give you the information about Steve Knudsen and all that, or whatever you need.
That's great. Thank you, David. I appreciate it.
Sure. That's fine.
Thanks, David, too. I appreciate that as well.
All right. Thank you. David, we can go ahead and move on to Stephanie's item.
Okay, that's fine. Robin already explained some of this, but since Stephanie is the task force member and presented it to us, I'd like to turn that over to her to explain what she had put in writing, so everybody else who is at the meeting who didn't get a chance to see what this is about can hear it. Stephanie?
Yes, so I'm unable to share the content of my computer, which has the attachments that I sent to the task force. One was a slide essentially a photograph of the intersection of Otterwood Road and Route 7 from the 2015 study, which showed the levels of service grades at each point, at each, I guess, each approach to the intersection. And the second attachment was an Excel worksheet summarizing each point and what the grades were. And what LRC is asking the county staff essentially is simply do a study, tell us, as a result of this development at these three places, the city, the Virginia Tech and Lamada site, what will the effect be on levels of service? You take that into account in your comments, in your recommendations, in your recommendations, I guess, to the task force, to the supervisor, to the planning commission. We want information. We want that studied. I mean, what else should I say?
Yeah, this is Bob Pecora again, and I can start, Stephanie. So thank you for sending in the comments. I'm going to have Kevin Sitzman and Evan Goldman help me out with this conversation because we did talk about it and we are studying it, the intersection. So I look back at the information that you have from the 2015, 2016 Tyson study. That's a phase 2 Tyson study. I looked at the mitigations that were proposed there. Yes, and that's up to the horizon year of 2030. There is other ongoing work regarding the Route 7 BRT system. So we're going to have actually a newer study regarding Route 7, and they're looking to 2045. They are going to be having a community meeting sometime this fall. Nothing has been scheduled yet, but when that meeting is going to be held, we will let you know about that meeting. So that's the Route 7 BRT study. So there might be other mitigations that come out of that study. And that's actually a little bit later on. That's a longer term project, but it's still ongoing in process. For this study, for the Lamada, Virginia Tech, and the city site, I talked with Evan Goldman and Kevin Sitzman from Grove Slade, and they are starting or have started what we call a sensitivity analysis. So they're looking at it particular to that intersection, what the impacts might be of it. So I'm going to turn over to Evan and then or Kevin to talk a little bit more about that. But they're still in the analysis part of it. We have not reviewed any data that has come out of that study yet. So, Evan.
Hi, I'm happy to speak just for a minute. This is Evan Goldman. So thanks, Bob, for the introduction there. Yeah, great. Okay. So anyway, yeah. So based upon the questions from the Lemon Road Civic Association, and requests from the county a few weeks ago, we did start analyzing the impact on that intersection. So we have preliminary data. We think we'll have a report in the next few days ready that we'll then share with FCDOT, and I think at the October meeting we can get into a detailed conversation about it. So thank you for bringing it up and raising it, and we will get you everything you want to see on that.
Thanks, Evan. Paul, I saw your hand is raised.
Yeah, oops, can you hear me?
Yes.
I just have a brief comment. I totally agree that there should be a study there, but I've heard two comments from the community, indicating problems on Highland and problems along Great Falls, maybe near Casemont. It's not just, I think we need to know exactly what's going on in the general area. The concept of us not addressing that and some kid getting killed or some pedestrian being struck is of great concern to me. And I think that, just to have one community group quite rightly point out the area that is of concern to them, I totally agree with. But if we have, particularly in the area, a lot of areas without sidewalks and children walking and people walking in general, that we need to have something that's comprehensive and not and done before we have anything going further to maximize safety in the area for the people who live there. So I don't see that necessarily. Maybe I haven't heard about it, but I've sort of heard just in the last few minutes people talking a little bit about, okay, well, we'll do something for this neighborhood or that neighborhood. Well, there may be people here with children, maybe people in the community with children who aren't on this call. And I just want to make sure that those children and the people in their areas are studied in a way that this doesn't create a danger to them.
Yeah, so Paul, this is Bob Pecora again. The FCDOT, the Transportation Department, is looking at a bike ped facility plan. We have not presented it yet to this task force because we are still in the early stages of it. We are coordinating with Evan's team and also with the City of Falls Church to look at it from a comprehensive perspective, both with what the city is planning to do for bike and ped facilities and how we can work together to make recommendations for planned facilities in the future. So we're not just looking at the Lamada, Virginia Tech site, but we're looking at Grove Avenue, Highlands, we're looking at Falls Hill neighborhood, Lemon Road, and all that. So we're looking at the surrounding area. So it's a much larger study. From that, we will come up with recommendations, and then we'll also put that in the recommendations that go with this plan amendment. But the other bike ped study is going to be, I believe it's going to be a separate study that takes on a much larger area. And then that project will be integrated into the active Fairfax plan, which is the larger county-wide system of bikes and trails that the county, also again, another division of our transportation department is going to be looking at county-wide, and that's a much larger study, which will be about 18 to 24 months, and there'll be a lot of community outreach regarding that one as well. So there's lots of little pieces happening right now. There's lots of little projects going on that are going to be all integrating with the planning effort for West Falls Church Lamada and Virginia Tech for this plan amendment. And as we have information that we could present, we will be bringing it to this task force to have for a discussion. And then also, not just this task force, we may be going out to the other, to the larger community as well.
Right,
So
but
it's in the works. So.
I understand. Thank you. But I also see that the October meeting, we're going to start talking about the draft plan amendment. How do you incorporate? How do you incorporate something that with an 18 to 24 month timeline as a within the context of the project where the plan draft, I guess, is starting on October?
So the recommendations we put together in this comp plan are going to be fed into that larger study. So the recommendations we make from the bike and ped study with this project is something that's going to be integrated when that one goes to the board in like 2 years' time. So they're looking at a county-wide system that integrates the bike master plan today and the trails plan, and looking at that as on a county-wide perspective. But this comp plan amendment is going to precede that one because we will have recommendations for it already. And if we're targeting sometime in 2021 to go to the Planning Commission board, that we'll have this part of the West Falls Church area ready to go to integrate into that larger plan.
And for this comprehensive plan that you're talking about now, that we're talking about next month, how are you going to incorporate concepts to lessen the chance that children will be killed?
Paul, if I may,
Mm-hmm.
Can you all hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Everybody. Okay. So the current comp plan covers this, and what we're going to do is we're going to add language. So while we don't have all the data, we'll still be able to put language in the plan that will address these concerns, right? Whether it's we can go intersection by intersection, we can go bike, pedestrian, all these different things we can insert into the new plan language, and then when they go for rezoning, it'll trigger that, guide. That's what the whole purpose of what we're doing is. So, let's go.
Okay.
Right. In the conversation we start with plan text today and next month, it's not, we're not going to be just done with it in October. There's going to be a series of meetings, and Brian and Michelle will talk about that as the comp plan amendment process of how we write plan text with you, taking your suggestions into it, into the staff comments or into the task force comments to write the comp plan text itself and the recommendations. So it's the start of a process here, Paul. So we're just getting into it. It's going to be a few more months of conversation about it. So
thank you.
So the traffic impact analysis hasn't been presented to us yet. The traffic impact analysis from which Route 7 and Otterwood was excluded is going to be presented at some point after we talk about plan amendment language, and you're going to, on the side, data about the, I don't quite understand how this is going to come together.
So I'll start with the conversation, and then Evan or Kevin might be able to join in with this. The traffic study that that was submitted to VDOT, it starts their the 90-day process. So VDOT has 90 days to review the comments. We've heard from VDOT that they probably will have their initial set of comments within about 45 days. So we may not be able to talk directly about the traffic study, what its findings are tonight, but it could be talked about at the October meeting. It could be talked about in the November meeting. When the comments come in from VDOT, they'll probably be either planning related or they'll be very technical regarding the methodology that was used. So when the comments come back, that's something that we can, that Evan and Kevin and we will talk about. It's like what things we can bring forward to the task force. If you want to see it all, that's sure, but we can talk about that. But we can talk about the intersections that were studied, the proposed mitigations and such. So it's
yeah, I'll jump in for a second, Bob. I think Stephanie, I totally hear you, and I think everyone on the committee, including Bob and myself, were all frustrated. The reason things have taken so long was the traffic study was really dependent on having a left turn in and out at Route 7, because that's one of the main ways to mitigate traffic. So until we got to a place where there was a design for that intersection that VDOT and FCDOT and the City of Falls Church all agreed on, I think the view was, that study has no merit. So we finally got there last month. That's why now the traffic study is finally being kind of officially reviewed. So for all of you on the task force, we've put up with 8 months of meetings on other topics while we were trying to design and get through that process. And I apologize, it just took a long time. It is the most complicated intersection I've ever worked on. But we did collaborate with the county and the city and VDOT and ultimately got there. So we will present some data tonight on traffic. Bob's team is going to be reviewing that. In October, we'll get into traffic in more detail. And then that will drive, comments and decision making and negotiations from now through March, basically. So there's plenty of time to work on that.
And if I could just add a quick note on that, the traffic impact study is very data based, and talks a lot about the operations of the mixing areas, the intersections where the vehicular paths cross, the bicycle and pedestrian paths come together. The other piece that we're talking about with regard to the presence or absence of sidewalks and bike lanes and things like that, that's very much a infrastructure facility sort of driven look. Is there a sidewalk? Does there need to be a sidewalk? Do there need to be a sidewalk do there need to be sidewalks on both sides of the street? Just one? I mean, is separate bike lane, is a shared use path enough? Those sorts of things are taken separately from what's in the traffic impact study, so they can proceed in parallel in two different realms. As Bob says, there's quite a few divisions within FCDOT, and they look at those in collaboration with one another, but independently because of the details involved.
Is there anybody else on the task force who wants to ask any questions about this subject? I don't see any hands up, but Stephanie, do you feel satisfied with this answer? Do you feel like you understand what's going on?
I don't feel like I understand what's going on. I maybe am hearing assurances that it's being addressed sideways or tunneling into it. I don't know. I'm not hearing that there's going to be a traffic impact analysis of that intersection. And that's
I'll second that actually, because what I don't understand, first of all, is it the case that this was not in the analysis before, but now as a result, you're going to put it in the analysis? That's not even clear to me, Bob or anybody.
No, so the way that the traffic impact study process works through VDOT's statewide process and the county's process is that the applicant and then the staff from the local jurisdiction, as well as the VDOT staff, meet and discuss. And in our case, Bob, we probably went back and forth 7 or 8 times to get to an agreed upon scope of the study, which intersections to look at, which horizon years, which other developments, which other roadway projects, all sorts of things like that. And then down to the minutia of exactly which boxes we check in the computerized analysis to do that. That study, that scope that was signed a while back, did not include Idlewood as an intersection to study. And we have subsequently submitted the traffic impact study to both the county and VDOT. However, we do have counts that are actually newer than the 2015 study counts. We have counts from 2017. We have run the analysis. We're looking at it as a team together, and as Evan mentioned, we'll be submitting that in the next day or so for Bob and his staff to look at and make sure that they agree with what we did in terms of that separate study, and then that can be distributed as well. And then, as mentioned before, we'll go over some high-level answers regarding the traffic study for the intersections closer to the site this evening, and then we can dive down into the many weeds next time.
Kevin, does that mean though that it is possible that you would be, as a part of this project, then offering some sort of mitigation or some sort of measures that would apply to that intersection? I'm just saying, is it possible? I'm not trying to get you to commit, but if it's now part of what you're studying, does that mean that it's brought within the realm of something that you could do something about in regard to this project?
So I think that's an answer for Evan, or question for Evan to answer.
Yeah, I can answer that question. I'll answer that question. So, obviously, Stephanie, we responded to your request. We are doing a study for your question. So there is a study. So just to make that clear, you will see that study and have it presented to you and be able to review it. Preliminarily from stuff we're looking at, we think there's some things that can be done that can help that intersection long-term, mitigate the impacts of our development. And so to the extent that that can be done and FCDOT and VDOT are open to it, and that would be, that would work. So yes, we are studying that. That would be part of this process. We are trying to really be helpful in this regard. So even though admittedly, it was not included originally, it wasn't part of the scope. We've gone through, years of traffic study at this point to get to a place, and it was not included, but because of your community's request, we are now doing it. So I hope that's more clear maybe than what I said before.
So we will hear about the effects of the proposed developments on that intersection.
Yep, 100%.
And county will pay attention to that in its time.
Oh yeah, because once I get their analysis tomorrow or whenever, I'll be reviewing it as well, and then discussing it with VDOT as well as the project team. So that intersection is controlled by VDOT because Route 7 is part of the national highway system, and that's very particular about big roads and their signalized intersections. And it's not just that intersection that they would be interested in. With this project, they're looking at all the intersections that Evans identified along Route 7 and Haycock Road. And that was talked about with VDOT at what we call a pre-scoping meeting. That's when the staff, we talk about the technology and the types of analysis that will be going forward. So we look at the existing conditions, and this is what they'll talk about later today. Existing conditions, what the future's going to look like with the development, what the future's going to look like based on the current comp plan, but no improvements. And then we look at a horizon year of 2045. So I'm already starting to get into the weeds of the discussion of it, but that's something that with on Idlewood intersection, we'll be looking at what the impacts are from the traffic today, and then also what's going to happen with the traffic in the future based on the developments at the City of Virginia Tech and Lamada sites. So I am really curious to see what their results are. So I just found out about it today that they have some results. So I'm anxious to take a look at it as well, and then I'll be anxious to present it to you as well, or ready to present it to you as well.
Thank you.
Not you, but everyone. I meant everyone. So
right.
Yeah.
Is there anybody else on the task force who wants to add anything here? So
Just,
Bob and go ahead. Yes, sorry. Who's talking?
Hey, David, it's Jay.
Oh, okay. Hey, Jay, go ahead.
Just one clarifying question on any traffic impact analysis that a dedicated amount of time is focused on the impact of rideshare and traffic and taxi traffic, as obviously that's had an impact on other projects within cities. I assume that it was part of any analysis, but I wanted to get that assurance moving forward.
Kevin, maybe you and I can tag team this. If that's part of the typical analysis, is your question meaning with rideshare? What's really the heart of the question there? That you think rideshare induces more or less traffic?
Well, it should be considered part of the analysis given the impact that rideshare has had everywhere, and whether it's comparing pre-COVID, post-COVID, I don't know, but I mean, I think it would not be transparent if you did not include the impact of rideshare and taxi traffic because of a project around a commuter-centric project. I mean, that's just my opinion.
So, in terms of the parameters that we scoped out, there's not a specific adjustment factor, if you will, for rideshare or for taxi traffic. There are certainly growth factors, other developments, and the impacts of transportation demand management and other things like that that are baked into it. To the extent that there's a shift from rideshare usage so that there's inbound and outbound traffic, that is not something that VDOT has endorsed an adjustment factor for going forward. So that's not something that we took into account specifically in the traffic impact analysis.
So okay, I guess then the answer is no.
Let me add something else. Because of the proximity to the transit station, there's a transit adjustment factor, or I forget it escapes the name of it, but it's a mode share reduction factor because of the transit facility right there at the station. So there is a I think it was 35% that this project was using as a reduction because of the transit facility there. So that's rail and bus traffic, bus transit traffic. So in the for like Jay, what you're asking about cabs or Uber or something like that, that could be part of a recommendation that we do with travel demand management. That's in the comp plan or TDM strategies. Those are recommendations that we could write that increased TDM strategies be used in this project. So as a recommendation. So now that you mentioned it, I believe, well, we always write that into the comp plan amendment. So when it's time to write that part of the section, it's like, we'll have you take a look at it as well as the rest of the task force to see if that's meeting the strategies that you're looking for.
Thank you, Bob, because I think it would be important, obviously, to factor that in and maybe even utilize something around this region and the impact that's had on a metro station or of comparable nature. So thank you. I'll shut up. I'll shut up now. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Unless there's some other question, I don't think I'm seeing a hand up. Looking at the agenda, we had scheduled 40 minutes for comp plan amendment and 50 minutes for one updated concept, which would take us to almost 9:30. So I don't think we're going to be able to allocate all that time to that. So we probably really need to move on. But I really would like to ask just one quick thing and ending all this. Every time we talk about transportation and timelines and studies and who's going to look at what and how long it takes and what's folded into what, I come away from my notes finding I couldn't possibly explain any of this to anybody in my association. Is there any way we can get any of this in writing so we see how all of these things interrelate? About the only thing I could tell anybody now, based on the notes that I've took, is that the traffic study was submitted to VDOT yesterday and they've got 90 days and they should get preliminary comments in 45 days. And beyond that, how all this stuff interrelates and the time we're going to have to look at this stuff. And in regard to Stephanie's question, how one study gets folded into another study and all that. I would love to see this somehow reduced to writing among those like Bob who actually know what's going on. And I don't like to put extra work on you, but I find it very difficult to process this stuff when it's not in writing.
Thanks, David. It's actually going to address that in just a minute.
Okay.
We are preparing a document to send to the task force that lays out a written timeline in the process for how we move forward through this.
Thank you, Brian. In which case, I'll turn this, I guess, back over to you now if we're on the comprehensive plan amendment part. Should I not? Yeah.
That's right.
Brian, just in terms of timing, when you're going through, some of the examples, you might just have to be judicious with your time because we need to be able to, we don't have a lot of time left. So
I can make it quick.
Yeah. Okay. It's fine to skip over.
Brian, why don't we do this to start with, since we really have to revise the timeline on here, because you would like to be finished by 9, correct?
That's when we would always like to be finished.
Always like to be finished, yes. So that's 1 hour and 5 minutes. How much time do you want to allocate to the comp plan and how much time do you want to allocate to the Lamada updated concept? And we'll try to keep within those limits.
I think I could public comment at the end. So
yeah,
I think there's public comment at the end again too. Let's see if we can set a frame right now.
I think I could probably get through my presentation maybe 10 to 15 minutes, but I just want to make sure there's enough time for questions from the task force afterwards, because I think it's important that everyone have a kind of a good understanding of what we're doing here.
Okay. All right, that's fine. I'll let you go ahead.
Okay. So in order to prepare everybody for looking at the draft comprehensive plan amendment starting next month, we're going to remind everyone what's involved in a comprehensive plan amendment. So after the last meeting, people had asked us for an overview of the plan amendment process and what the expectations were for task force members. And so part of that is this document that we're putting together to send out to the task force that David had suggested after the last meeting. And then part of it is what we're going over tonight, which will also be included. So to begin, we have to ask the question of what is comprehensive planning? And in short, there are two major questions that we're asking: what land uses are appropriate, and how much of it is appropriate, or in other words, what's the appropriate intensity? In addition, there are some other questions we seek to answer in the comprehensive planning process, but they're by no means the only ones. Especially in our transit station areas like West Falls Church, our community business centers, and our urban centers, you can find some additional types of guidance in the comprehensive plan. So here's by no means an exhaustive list, but you can find design guidelines or recommendations on establishing connections or smooth transitions between developments and neighborhoods. And you can find guidance on the location of public facilities and amenities. And as I said previously, these are general guidelines. So I know that while many people are interested in the details, like what retailers may be there, what kinds of architecture, what styles of architecture, we don't really go into that kind of depth in the comprehensive plan. It's more of these bigger picture issues like does residential go here? Does office or retail go here? Is mixed use? How many square feet or how many dwelling units are appropriate for here? So with that being said, what's our process here with the task force, with the West Falls Church Comprehensive Plan Amendment? So I'll finish actually covering these 4 items really quickly, and then it may be worthwhile to just pause for a couple of minutes to make sure that these are clear to everybody, so we can open it up for a couple of questions from the task force. So first, staff will draft an initial draft plan amendment text based on a few different things: Board of Supervisors adopted policies, like the transit-oriented development policy that we all discussed earlier on in the task force, and which you should all have a copy of in your binder. It'll be based on some of the concepts presented by the development team, from input from the task force and from the community, and on planning best practices. And we're going to go over some of that at next month's meeting. So then we'll present that draft plan amendment to you all, and you'll have the opportunity to review it before and after October's meeting. And you'll have the opportunity to vote. After that, you'll have the opportunity to vote on changes to the text, to vote on recommendations to approve the draft text, or you can vote on adopting some parts of the draft plan and vote on changing or the recommendations on other parts. And in that process, staff may incorporate the task force suggestions, or they may be included in the task force's report to the Planning Commission and Board as a separate suggestion from the staff recommendation. So this generally happens if DPD staff can't support some of the task force adopted recommendations. So it could be the case, for example, that, I mean, this is an extreme example, the task force could decide that what you think is appropriate at the West Falls Church Station is residential development only at 1 dwelling unit per acre, which is a very low density, and our transit-oriented development policy wouldn't support that, so we wouldn't be able to align with the task force on our recommendation. So that's just kind of an extreme example. And so then once the final draft is presented to the task force, after reviewing it and making changes to recommendations, the task force will vote on adopting its recommendation. And so this could take a couple different forms. It could consist only of a piece of recommended comprehensive plan text. It could say that it's just a vote in support of the staff written plan text, or it could be a recommendation of the comprehensive plan text with some other recommendations or suggestions to the Planning Commission or the board that aren't necessarily incorporated into it. So they may just be kind of general ideas that you would like to see in the plan amendment. So with that, are there any questions about this part of?
I have a couple, and I will certainly open up to the rest of the task force also. But first of all, is this presentation you're giving us with these bullet points on here? Is this something you can send us, or is it just this one page?
Well, I'll post. Well, this is just something that I put together for the presentation tonight. Like I said,
Yeah.
We are in the middle of creating a sort of a larger guide to the task force that's kind of lays out the process and the timelines, and so that includes, the procedures for working our way through the plan amendment, and our timelines as well.
Okay, and I'm sorry. When would we have that?
We're hoping to have that to you in the next week or two. Okay,
that's fine. And then I guess I had one other question, is I'm not quite clear from what you were saying. You're indicating that the staff will be drafting a suggested plan amendment text, and you will show us this at the October meeting and ask us to vote on it then?
No, we're not asking you to vote on it then. We'll be presenting some of the draft text to you at the October meeting.
All right.
I don't think we're expecting you to show it to you and then you to vote immediately on it. I know that you'll have to go back to your communities. We're planning on doing some broader community engagement, having some sort of virtual open house, and so to get community input on that. So yeah, we're not expecting any kind of immediate turnaround. Like, okay, I know you're seeing for the first time tonight. Now you have to decide what
Yeah, well,
what your position is on it.
So basically what we would do October is you'd show us these proposed changes and we would just discuss them. Each one, like, why did you do this? And what are the problems with this particular one? Just go through item by item that you've changed and discuss them, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's an opportunity for the task force to discuss them and decide where they stand on things.
Okay, that sounds fine. I don't see any hands up. Is there anybody else on the task force who would like to?
David, this is John Oldfelder.
Yes, John.
I was just going to say, I mean, the idea will be that the task force will presumably have a draft of the staff's plan amendment ahead of time before they do their in-depth discussion, so that if members of the task force have specific amendments or changes that they think should be made to the language, they can bring those back to one of the task force meetings for discussion and a vote as to whether they want to amend the staff draft. And in the end, however, the staff does have some say as to what goes into the final report. But there should be a process where everybody's had a chance to review the draft in writing and think about it. And if they want to discuss it with some of the folks that they're working with back where they live, and then bring those suggestions for possible amendments or changes to the task force as a group, which can then discuss them and vote on them.
Thank you, John. So this will actually be done over the course of a few meetings, I take it.
Yeah, this will be a months-long process.
David.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to add, John, thanks for the clarifying comments. This is really where the rubber meets the road for us as a task force. The staff's going to come in, they're going to, give us language that they'd perhaps like to see adopted. We go and we're going to also have our own language, perhaps, and then we hash it out, and we get to a place that is amenable, hopefully, to both. If not, so be it. We have our justification; they have their justification. So this is really where our work, comes to fruition, if you will.
Okay.
So to John's point, we should expect or hope to get their language ahead of the meeting so that we've got a chance to review it, give us some talking points, and also have some of our own language. This is really where our work comes into play.
Okay, thank you, Darren and John, both of you. If no other questions, it's all right with me if you want to keep going, Brian.
Okay, I see Jay's hand up. I just want to make sure that wasn't just left up from earlier on accident.
Jay, is your hand still up from earlier, or you have another question?
Looks like he lowered it. Okay.
Okay. All right. Why don't you continue then, Brian?
All right, sounds good. Thank you. All right, moving on. So with that, we will briefly view what exists in our current plan recommendations that are subject to the plan amendment. You should have all received a highlighted copy of the current plan text. If you haven't had a chance to review it yet, I urge you to do so prior to the next meeting, and we're going to kind of review some of those different sections just briefly. So, for example, the first part is the overview. This is simply just a brief description of the Lamada and the Virginia Tech tracts and the neighboring land and the City of Falls Church. So the highlighted portion right here is what we believe would be within the scope of the plan amendment. And so, you know, there's stuff in here that would require updates related to the Lamada and the Virginia Tech tracts and the City of Falls Church. And then there are also the transit development area conditions and recommendations. And these are area-wide guidelines that aren't necessarily subject to the plan amendment, but they do contain references to some of the site-specific recommendations on the Lamada and the Virginia Tech parcels. And so those would need to be updated to be consistent with any amendments to Lamada and Virginia Tech. So for example, here you can see there are some references to, you know, the square footage of institutional use at Virginia Tech or the number of dwelling units in the entire transit development area. So those would just be numbers that would have to be updated so that there's consistency between the different parts of the plan.
And
so
the highlighted language is in the current plan. You're just highlighting it as areas where there will definitely have to be some updating. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah, right now we're not looking at any draft text. It's all currently adopted plan text. The same with these figures. So for example, this is figure 13, which is in the current plan for the West Falls Church transit station area. So, you know, we would imagine that the City of Falls Church and the University of Virginia Tech tract, those would probably be combined into a single tract and renamed the Virginia Tech tract. And again, another figure, this is a height map that would need to be updated in order to be consistent with what we feel is appropriate for a transit station area. Again, only the parts for Virginia Tech and Lamada would be updated as part of this. So anything across Haycock Road or the Village and the Pavilion would remain the same. And then figure 14, which has the pedestrian circulation, open space, and landscaped buffers in the transit station area. Again, this would require updates to be consistent with a new proposed grid of streets. And then the bulk of the updates we're expecting would be under the site-specific recommendations in the Land Unit A section. So pictured here is part of the recommendation on the Lamada tract. As I mentioned earlier, you know, we're looking at land use and intensity. So it has the location of where we're talking about, and it has land use appropriate for residential development, and the intensity, 30 dwelling units per acre. And then it has, you know, other guidelines, as I mentioned, to the extent that such development complements rather than competes with the use of the transit hub, and it recognizes some of the surrounding uses and how this fits in. And then similarly here, the part of the Virginia Tech recommendations. So again, this is kind of the meat of what that task force will be looking at in terms of a plan amendment. So this is the guidance found here specific only to the Virginia Tech parcel and doesn't relate to any of the other portions of the transit station area. And again, you can see recommendations on land use, institutional use, or residential or office retail, and the intensity, so 240,000 square feet of institutional, 130 dwelling units, nearly 44,000 of office retail. What's not pictured here are the site-specific conditions for Virginia Tech, which encompass some more of those other guidelines that I mentioned earlier. And you can find those in that highlighted document that I sent around to the task force. So now that we've briefly covered what's kind of up for amendment in the current plan, let me go over the types of edits you can expect to see. So as I see it, there are 3 different types of changes. There are editorial changes, which aren't substantive. There are some formatting changes, moving things around for clarity. And then there's really what this task force is going to be focusing on, the substantive changes that affect the land use recommendations in the West Falls Church area. So I'm going to just quickly go over some examples of these. So an editorial edit, for example, and this is the format that you would expect to see draft plan text in, with strike throughs through deleted parts of the text and underlines under additions. So for example, any references to the University of Virginia, and the University of Virginia Tech Education Center, the University of Virginia, would be deleted. And then there would be an addition describing the planned development in the City of Falls Church. These are all just examples. An example of a formatting edit might be, so right now we have recommendations for the Lamada tract in 2 different places, 3 pages apart in the comprehensive plan. So for improved readability, we would look at combining these sections. And so I want to just mention these to the task force, even though this won't be a big focus of our discussions, because when you look at the draft plan text that we're going to provide, it will include these types of edits in the text, alongside the more substantive recommendations. And this would be an example of a more substantive recommendation. So this is an example of what can be amended on the Virginia Tech tract. So as you can see here, it would be changed from low to medium to high intensity, the floor area ratio maximum. In this example is changed from 0.5 to 2.5 FAR. And then there are additional uses added, and the intensity of those uses are described. And again, this is the format you can expect to see it in, with strike-throughs for deletions and underlines for additions. And as I mentioned, the figures in the plan will have to be considered for updates as well. And yeah, I hope that provides some clarity to the task force and onto how we'll be looking at the plan amendment, what we'll be looking at. So at the next meeting, we can start to review some draft text. And are there any questions regarding that? Let me see if I can. Open up my participants tab. Any hands raised from the task force members? Was that clear?
I don't see any, Brian. I don't see any hands raised except previous ones from attendees that I'm sure they haven't taken them down. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. There is one. Are we taking it from attendees as well as task force members at this point or not?
Right now, we were just going to do task force members, I think, especially because we're under a little bit of a time crunch.
Okay. I would guess I would say to anybody who's got their hands up, who's just an attendee now, if you still have a question at the end and we have time, maybe they can ask them then. Brian, if we have the time.
Yeah, that
okay.
works.
Okay. All right, I'm not seeing any task force hands up.
Okay. In that case,
and I think that was helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Evan, will you be presenting? Should I make you the presenter? You're muted if you didn't realize.
Sorry. Thank you. I just unmuted myself. So I am just saving. I just realized I forgot to save it as a PDF. So give me 1 second because I want to make it smaller so it won't be a delay in presenting. And then I will present it. All right, my computer's just thinking. Give me 1 second. There we go. Oh my Lord. You know what? Maybe I'll just present it as a PowerPoint. Sorry, it's a very large file, so my computer's just gotten slow all this. 1 second. There we go. Okay, got it. Okay, so yeah,
the presenters, you should be able to share your screen.
Perfect. I'll share it right now. I do apologize. I sometimes forget because we work in PowerPoint and I forget to convert it. And if I present it in PowerPoint, we'll be here all night just changing the slides. Okay, so share my screen. There we go. That content. Adobe Acrobat. There. Okay, so let me know when you can see something.
Well, I think we can see something now.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, you can see it. Great. I'm going to actually, so for some reason, weird. Okay, you can see it now. You can see the, it says West Falls Church Station Planning Area presentation.
Yes.
Excellent.
It's the cover sheet.
Great. Okay, so, and as I present, I will just confirm that we're on the same page, because sometimes it's a little bit slow. So with that, I'm gonna move forward. Okay, there we go. Okay, so the first of all, for those who didn't hear at the beginning, I'm Evan Goldman. I'm Executive Vice President of Development and Acquisitions at EYA, and we're a local development company. And then there's a number of us on the phone today, or on the video call today, from Rushmark, Neil Kumar, Brant Snyder from Hoffman Associates, Pam Lee from my office at EYA. You already heard from Kevin Sitzman, our traffic engineer. I believe we have our land use attorneys on the phone as well, Andrew and Bernie from Walsh Colucci. And I think that's it, but I may have missed someone. I apologize if I did. So with that, today we're going to talk about progress and process update, concept plans for West Falls Church Station area, which for some of you will be the first time you've seen this. We have been doing some community meetings, so some of you have already seen some of the slides. We'll talk about circulation and mobility, and then traffic analysis as well. So just to give you a progress update of where we are, we talked about this a little bit, where we're going. So we're at a year ago at the September 2019 task force meeting, we presented some development proposals. Throughout the winter, we did traffic studies and continued to modify our study, our plan. As you know, we took a little bit of a break for a period of time while we tried to solve the intersection issue at Route 7. And then COVID hit in March, and that slowed us down for a few months. So spring of 2020, we didn't really have any meetings until the summer. In June, we had a meeting where we presented the new intersection at Route 7 and Chestnut Street. In August, July, we actually presented open space concepts or plans. We then continued on and working on the intersection design and submitted our TIA, traffic impact analysis, to VDOT and to the county, as well as the City of Falls Church. And then, of course, we're back now together in September. So going forward, fall and winter, as Brian just mentioned, starting to work through language, getting into details of the plan, getting into details of the traffic study, and then at some point next spring, getting the Planning Commission and getting in front of the Board of Supervisors And then it won't be for another year when we go through a more detailed planning exercise called CDP and FDP approval. And so for some of the folks, what's important just to understand is we're still in the comp plan stage. We're at a very high level. In the case of this project, because of how important it is and its location, we've gotten into a lot more detail than you typically would at this point. And a lot of the questions being raised or answers really come later in the process at CDP and FDP, the next stage. But we're happy to provide more information along the way. So comprehensive plan amendment, it's this permission to rezone, and it locks in your maximum density, maximum building heights and uses, and you'll see some of what we're proposing today. Whereas conceptual development plan, which is the next step after this approval, which you'll all be involved in, of course, is actually rezones the site, finalizes your streets and your block layouts, your building heights, the uses, offsite improvements, finalizes architecture and engineering details. So there's a lot of the kind of detail work that we'll go through in the next phase. During the comprehensive plan amendment process, just to give everyone a sense of scale, I think it's always important to step back and especially in a community where you're struggling with traffic. You know, on the Lamada site alone, you know, someone could go out there and build 700 apartments in a fairly suburban style. That's what it's allowed for today, 700 apartments and roughly 50,000 feet of retail. And so on the Lamada site, the request is really more about planning and good design and getting heights for the parcel to allow the buildings to be spread out more and have more open space. There's only about 130 additional residential units being requested and a little bit of commercial office to make it a mixed-use project. So the increase at the Lamada site is minimal. It's 0.23 or 0.24 FAR over what's allowed today on the plan. On the Virginia Tech site, because of this opportunity to land Virginia Tech as a great new tenant and asset for the county, that site is asking for a little bit more density, from going from 0.5 to 2.5, so a 5-time increase. But obviously, because of the fact that they're bringing a great new anchor tenant and hit construction, as well as the academic center. And to give you all a sense of scale, typically at a metro station in the region, if we were looking at a comprehensive plan process, the upzoning would be on the order of 5 to 10 times. So at Pike Rose, for example, we went from 0.5 FAR to 3.5 FAR. That's fairly typical. And that was about a quarter mile or half mile from metro. So this process, while it has taken a while because of COVID and the traffic studies and the unique attributes of this area, the request is not particularly large. It's really about how do we do it right? How do we get the right grid of streets? How do we come up with the right plan? How do we provide better access to transit and design a project that's mixed use and really amazing? And that's what this process really has been about and really should be focused on. So this is our new concept plan that we've been working on and we've shared with some of you in your community meetings. And the main goal really stays the same, which is this idea of creating a safe pedestrian and bike oriented way to get through and to the metro from Route 7 all the way to the metro, and then continuing those bike lanes all the way out to Haycock so that those coming from the community on the other side of Haycock will be able to get to the metro more safely, as well as the new people that are going to be moving into the apartments or the condos or the townhomes, as well as working in the office buildings within the actual parcel, this ability to get around without having to rely on the car. And so this central spine open space is really critical. And then secondly, getting the existing bus infrastructure a little bit more out of the way. Today, that bus infrastructure really sits right in the heart of the Lamada site. And so to walk to the metro, you're walking through essentially a parking lot. And the concept here is to make that a great urban street and put the bus infrastructure on the outside up against Route 66 so that it doesn't impede the pedestrian bike flow to the metro entrance. The Commons Drive, just to give you also a sense of scale, the City of Falls Church has rezoned that property for about a 3.5 FAR. Obviously, we're the developer of that site, whereas the Lamada site is a 0.96 and the Virginia Tech site is a 2.5. So a little bit different than what you would typically see. The highest density in this case is up against Route 7, and that's because that's the most visible and that's the place where retail will work. And then it tends down towards the metro as you get closer. And that's to make sure that the overall density in this neighborhood, this 40-acre neighborhood, can work within the limits of the traffic system. This is just to give you a sense of part of the reason there's so many different types of uses within this plan. From residential apartments to condos to senior housing to hotel to office to academic to townhomes is so that it can be absorbed relatively quickly, meaning that we can build this and it's not all competing with each other. And so, for example, if this was, what's already proposed, 700 apartments, right? That's going to take years to absorb, which means you have to build it out over a longer period of time. That means that the community is getting it piecemeal. Whereas what we've come up with here is a design for the whole neighborhood that, because it's all different uses that work well together, we can deliver it all within a 3 to 4 year period of time. So everything you're seeing on this page would be built before about 2024, 25, with the city parcel going first, followed by Virginia Tech, some more apartments in the townhomes. That's great from an absorption perspective. It means we're not flooding the market with one product type and potentially tanking the market, whether that's townhomes or rental apartments. And what it means is you get all that infrastructure, all the open space, all the walkability up front with this first phase of development. It all comes online together, which is really great. And that's actually pretty rare. Most projects of this scale, they'll be built a little block at a time, and you get the infrastructure along the way. And sometimes the infrastructure is behind and sometimes it's ahead. What that leaves us with is a few parcels remaining. Parking lot here right at the Metro, which will be a future apartment building. Phase 3 buildings, which would be the office and the apartments. And I'll note here again on the Lamada site, the office density, which is the one that creates the most traffic, is the last phase to be built. And so there's plenty of time for the overall neighborhood to turn into something that's more walkable and urban. There'll be another residential building across from the Virginia Tech Academic Center here. And then there are 2 future phase buildings within the high school site. So those 5 future buildings would get built beyond 2025, probably through 2035. And then this is what it looks like when it's fully built out and complete. And you can see these dark green lines are the bike lanes going all the way up and connecting to Haycock, as well as obviously pedestrian spaces. Those are all really nice broad sidewalks. There's a shared use path that connects directly to the Metro from the bike lanes. There's sidewalks everywhere, and I'll walk through that as part of our circulation plan in a few slides. We've spent a lot of time thinking about open space and talking about open space. And I think we shared with this committee back in February some pretty images of what we thought those open spaces might look like. And we've been sharing that in our community meetings with folks. But this is just gives you a sense of scale of how it breaks down and what the percentages are. So overall, each of these numbers are highlighting different spaces within the plan that are open spaces to be used, some of which are within the city, some of which are in the county. As you can see, we've included the fields within George Mason High School, and that was purposeful. About 50% of their rec leagues are county residents, not city. So it really is an asset, whether you're walking over there to use tennis courts or run on the track. It's just kind of a shadow anchor outside of the county, but that is always worth just being aware of. So what this plan ends up with is about 24 acres of open space. It's 37% open space on the Lamada site, which is almost double the requirement. And on the Virginia Tech site, it's 50% more than the requirement at 30%. So there really has been a lot of thought put into making this an open and green space, preserving tree preserves, creating tree preserves, and then working with the county staff, as well as comments we've heard from the task force to make sure that this feels like a livable place long-term. So on the next slide, we'll get into each individual project. So on the Lamada site alone, in addition to the open space, which is double the requirement, the urban park space requirement would typically be 2.1 or is 2.1 acres on this project. We're at 2.56 acres. So once again, above where the urban space requirement would be. And then the key would be at CDP, really working with staff, working with the community to design each of these spaces really thoughtfully. We have some ideas for what that is already, of course, but that will get better with time. Virginia Tech, similarly, their requirement is 1.58 acres, and I'm sorry, 1.3 acres, and they've got 1.58 acres of active rec space, so also above the requirement. And so combined, as I said before, one of the really big impetuses of this plan is just that the zoning that was recommended in the comp plan, or the comp plan, especially very suburban in nature, kind of low level 700 apartment units spread throughout the site. What we think is more appropriate is, where it's appropriate, let's have some taller buildings and create as much open space as possible. And that's what we've really done. This is the first time many of you are seeing the actual proposed plan for the Lamada site. And so before, we always struggled with where this street was supposed to go, and we finally just made it straight, which seems to be the most logical thing to do. It'll be the best for traffic flow, for bike flow, and for pedestrian flow. And so you can see the green bike lanes going all the way up through and then connecting out to the Metro access road. For the villages and the pavilions, we've preserved the tree preserve separating the two properties. And so the space behind the townhomes here is actually the roadway today. So you can get a sense if you were to walk out there how far those homes are from you, and you'll have that tree screen blocking your residences from the new development. So we've kept the heights low and the development low intensity along the existing residential, and then tented up towards higher heights and density as you get to the metro itself. The street in the, as you know, on the high school site and on the Virginia Tech site, the park space is in the center median. When you get to the Lamada site, because of the geometry of the site, we've pushed the open space to the western side or northwestern side of the road instead of in the median, but it continues as an urban linear plaza and then ends in a park and wraps all the way around to the metro. So the concept is once you get here, you can see that metro, and this whole space will be designed cohesively so it feels like a space that was designed appropriately. From a circulation perspective, as I said before, the bus loop is now on the outside of the site, so out of the middle, which makes this a much better pedestrian-oriented space. The Kiss and Ride comes up the center, and they have their Kiss and Ride drop zone right here at the Urban Plaza. And then the people going to the Lamada Garage would be directed to Falls Church Drive. And this was something that Lamada asked us to really study. How do you separate these different uses so that they each arrive in a different way and you don't have conflicts where buses and Kiss and Ride and people trying to get to the garage are all coming together in the same place. So once again, buses would come up this way. If you were going to the Kiss and Ride, you would either come from Metro Access Road or from Falls Church Drive as you do today. Get on the main street, there'd be a sign here telling you to make a left turn, and you go to the Kiss and Ride drop off and then circulate around. And if you were going to the garage, the signage would point you to Falls Church Drive. You would come up and go directly into the garage here, or come off Route 66, make a left turn and go into the garage here. So it really separates out those uses and puts the flow of traffic throughout. One thing you are noticing, and this is partially a result of COVID, we're trying to think about how do we design a place where, in a world where retail is struggling. And so one of the concepts is to focus the roughly 200,000 feet of retail on the high school, on the city of Falls Church and the Virginia Tech sites, have some of that retail bleed over into the Lamada site, and then to work on a townhome design where that ground level has the ability to be flexible for potential live work opportunities, and has the flexibility and design of an urban residential building so that this all feels very mixed use in nature. And then to create a linear park space that becomes a draw in and of itself. And we have some images that I can share of what that might look like. And so that concept along there would be, and we've actually been working with staff on some new ideas related to this. So this will change a little bit. But the idea is, alleys of trees that really make it safe and comfortable to walk there. Obviously stormwater management, elements of play along that pedestrian experience as you go through the Lamada site to the metro, that in and of themselves can be draws. On this next slide, there were two images we really loved, or three, I'd say. One is this kind of kids play structure in Noma in DC, which is a multi-level play structure that's linear in fashion, where you can imagine people walking their kids or grandkids into this urban plaza and playing, and then also creating activity on the street. The idea of a garden or something that in and of itself becomes a draw, so that if retail is not active and retail is still struggling, there's some other reason to come to this place, whether it's to see the beautiful roses blooming or to walk in a botanical garden or sit and enjoy outdoor seating areas that are protected from the vehicular traffic with movable furniture. And then of course, open spaces where people can throw a Frisbee or just enjoy. And so that whole concept stretches from the high school site all the way to the metro. And then, as I mentioned before, this concept of townhomes that have a kind of live work feel. This is a project we built in Hyattsville. And so the architecture is not in any way, shape, or form what we're thinking for this site, but the concept of the fact that these were flexible residential units where, many of them have bedrooms on the first floor, but some of them have been able to use that space commercially. And I think in the age of COVID, there probably will be a lot more people working from home long term. So the ability to use that first floor of the townhome, if it's designed in a commercial way, as your essentially your office away from the actual office. Could be a really nice amenity for not just the project, but also for the purchasers of these homes. And so that's kind of how that would look and feel. And I've been talking to a particular staff member about, how you could do that within the Fairfax County zoning ordinance. These are additional images of what that project looks like today. And you can see, even though those are townhomes, they have a much more multifamily oriented feel. As I said, this won't be the architecture, but just gives you a sense of scale and concept. This is another image from that project. And I will say this project was cutting edge in its day. This was in Prince George's County, and these houses sold for $300,000 to $400,000 each. So very different architectural style and level of detail than you'd find in Falls Church, but it was successful in its own right. And then another project where we're doing something similar in Midline in Reston, where these are actually townhomes that look like apartment buildings on the right, and where the retail stops at this block, and then you have this great pedestrian-oriented experience that feels just like it was a retail street, even though those are actually townhome units. And so that'll be one of the fun things to work through with all of you in the future. And then I included these images from a recent project we just delivered in Alexandria, just because we're always talking about one-earths. And I've tried describing it, but I figured I would show you what one looks like. So we just delivered this project in the waterfront in Alexandria. It's called Robinson Landing. On the left is a one-earth that we built within the space. And so this is kind of a shared street where people walk right up the middle, but it is also for cars and bikes. There is, kind of stormwater management and tree planters. So there's also a sidewalk that's protected along the edge. But, on any given day, you'll see people just walking down the street towards the waterfront, as in our case, it'd be towards Metro. And of course, sometimes you'll see cars. This is under construction still, so there's not a whole lot of activity going on, but the project just delivered last week. And so there's a lot more people out there today. And then on the right, this is an image of a muse. And so I've also mentioned that terminology over time, where you have kind of apartments and townhomes entering out onto a common open space. And this is just kind of a great example of the same project of how that looks, once again, under construction. And so this looks much more beautiful today now that it's open. And if any of you have a chance, now that it's outdoors, in outdoor weather, I'm happy to give people tours of sites. So if anybody wants to see that, I'm happy to meet them and give a 6-foot distant, socially distant and responsible tour. From a building height perspective, so we'll start from the high school site. So these are already approved and buildings under design. The high school, the City of Falls Church allows for up to 15 stories on the high school site. And so you're seeing build the condo building at 170 feet, the senior housing at 150, phase 2 residential at 160, apartments at 85. So most of these buildings range from kind of 75 to 170 feet height, which is roughly 15 stories for the maximum, roughly, I'd say 7 to 15 stories. As we go north up to the Virginia Tech parcel, the heights drop to the academic Virginia Tech Center at 135 and residential at 135 here. That's what's being asked for. That doesn't mean not all of that will be 135. There's portions of that are much lower, especially the retail podium zones, but that is the height there. And then as you get towards the Lamada site, as you're getting kind of further from the retail density and the kind of energy of the project, which is centered around this really great 900-foot long park, the heights go down even further. The master plan, the current comp plan, proposed 35 and 45-foot heights. And so what we asked for is 50-foot heights for the townhome areas. Those houses will actually be closer to 40 to 45, but we've asked for 50 to give some flexibility because of grade. And then the apartment buildings at 85 and 95 feet, which is kind of a typical wood frame apartment building above retail. So it's about a 5 or 6 story building above retail. The garage today is 80 feet to give you a sense of scale. And then the 2 tallest buildings would be the phase 3 building, which would be built last. And that's the office and future apartment building at 120 feet, or roughly 12 stories right up the metro. So it gives you a sense of scale for the community. That's, the residents that are back here, you largely will be shielded from that height view because you have much lower density and you have buildings in front of you already that are roughly 35 to 40 feet. And then we have had conversations with the Lemon Road community about what this would look and feel like, and how through dark skies ordinances and good lighting and good design, we can actually shield the garage and have that be a nicer, more attractive view instead of the lights that were out of the garage today. Circulation and mobility. So this is the Lamada site. We'll share this with all of you, so I'm not going to go through it in incredible detail, but you can certainly study it and then ask us whatever questions you have. The yellow are showing the bike lanes, which will be on opposite sides of the street. We've been talking to FCDOT about whether that might want to be all on one side of the street, a cycle track instead of separated. We're fairly flexible, but we've been showing it this way. The purple is the bus routing, and so that those buses come down and cross and circulate around. For the villages and pavilions, one of the nice thing is those buses and all that through traffic that is currently behind your homes will get moved 100 feet closer to the metro. And the current road that sits behind the trees will just become a very low vehicular traffic alley just to serve the garages of the townhomes that are on there. So it becomes a little bit more private space and a buffer between you guys and the larger traffic experience on New Street 1. The Kiss and Ride, as I already mentioned, comes right up the center in red. And then the orange is a shared use path that connects from the bike lanes all the way back out to Route 7. Most of the streets are two ways. There is a one-way street here, and that's mostly to give priority to cars coming off Route 66 to get into the garage. And these are one-way loops that allow for Kiss and Ride to function properly. And then, of course, the Lamada bus ride is only for buses in this back area. The bike circulation in the larger area, there's a shared use path on Route 7. We'll be building bike lanes all the way from Route 7 over to Haycock. One thing that came up tonight that is worth working with the county on, and I think it's been expressed eloquently, the streets within the Mount Daniel neighborhood on Grove and Highland do not have sidewalks. You're 100% correct that they're not safe. And so similarly going over the tracks to the neighborhoods to the east of Route 66. And so I know that the city and the county have worked effectively to get some MBTA grant money to build sidewalks on Shreve, just to the other side of Route 7. And I think really that's, if the community really wants to see something like that, that's really something to focus on, because I agree you want to have those safe pedestrian areas throughout these neighborhoods. And it's a shame they weren't built with sidewalks to begin with. But you can see the bike lanes here, as well as the shared use paths, and then the vehicular flow for the whole larger area. I'll highlight one thing here that we'll come back to when we get into the traffic study. This ramp here is really critical. That's under construction now. And what that does is it connects the 66 off ramp, where all those cars today come here to Haycock, make a left turn to go to the metro, and they clog up this intersection. And with this addition, you'll be able to go from or not you, but people who want to go to metro from the west will be able to get from 66 all the way to the metro itself more quickly and directly without going through your streets or your intersection. And that takes roughly 300 to 400 cars out of this intersection and helps make this function much better. And we'll talk about that shortly. Obviously, primary access and flow still on Leesburg Pike and Haycock. Secondary is this grid of streets we're creating, which is really critical as well. Somebody on the call earlier mentioned Waze and Google Maps, which is really often how people get around neighborhoods today. More than likely in the future, as local folks, if you need to go to Haycock and make a left, you live in the pavilions or the villages, for example, or to the east of Route 66, you would likely shoot off onto the new Main Street and make your left turn here because it's going to be a faster route than sitting at Haycock. And what it does is it allows for distribution of traffic. And what's great about the apps is normally, if in the old days, if you just looked at a map, you would never think to do that, because your assumption would be the fastest way would be to just go straight and make a left turn. Those apps, because of their algorithms, can help point you in the right direction where there's less traffic flow. So this is what had held us up for such a long time. The intersection of, let me just go back and show you where we are now. This intersection right here is really critical because obviously if this road, as it approaches Route 7, doesn't have a left turn, then that means that all of the cars from this development, all the cars from the metro parking lot, as they do today, would have to go out to Haycock and make a left turn. And a lot of what your community suffers from is that the only way to make a left turn on Route 7 today is to go to that intersection, and so it backs up. So one of the real tenets of good design and placemaking and planning and TOD, or transitory development, is to create a grid of streets and create as many ways as possible for people to go so that they can spread the cars out and make those intersections better. And in the ideal situation, to make those intersections better so they can even function better for pedestrians and have more pedestrian activity. So this is critical, the lefts in as well as the lefts out. And that has been, I'd say, about 8 months of really, really hard design work to come up with something that seems to meet everybody's needs, that allows the commercial property owners to have access, protects the neighborhoods on the other side of Route 7 from cut-through traffic, allows the left in and left out, that allows people to have access to the metro and all the new development here. And this is the solution that has been arrived at, that's been presented to VDOT, FCDOT, to the property owners, to the supervisors. And the concept is that at the end of Chestnut Street, Chestnut will now close. It will end in a open space. And then there will be an opening into the current shopping center next door. Essentially, we'll have a new opening that will be at a traffic light. And so for people who live in the neighborhood who want to be able to make a left turn out on Route 7, they will have the ability to go through that shopping center to make a left out. Waze and other apps won't take people there because it'll show this as a dead end. But for local folks, they'll be able to know how to do that. For you as well, since you guys live in the neighborhood, that's something that you might end up using to cut, to go straight or to make a left turn onto Route 7 from there. And what it really does is it allows the commercial property to maintain their access as well. They were, under threat of potentially being closed off with a right in, right out along this entire edge. And that is how we were able to solve this issue and create a traffic light, which then creates safe pedestrian crossing and gets a lot of these folks the ability to walk or bike or get to metro more easily. And, I was listening to a lot of the questions tonight, and traffic is clearly one of the biggest issues in this area. But traffic solutions are things that build on each other. So what often happens is the knee-jerk reaction is to close things off. And that typically just makes things worse. So, you have a modal split or number of people that take metro today in your area that's fairly low. And in areas that have successfully built a grid of streets and bike lanes and great pedestrian access to metro, what they see is not just does the project become transit oriented and the people that live and work in the project use metro, but for folks that live 10, 15, 20-minute walk away or a mile away for bikes or even more, their mode split goes up and they start taking transit. And that alone can take a lot of cars off the street. So as you can imagine, people that live in Falls Hills today, many of whom do not want to cross Route 7 because it's a barrier. If even 5% of those residents start walking to metro or biking to metro, that takes X percent of traffic off of this intersection and the whole system starts getting better. The traffic studies don't really account for that. So the traffic modeling that you're going to see is in some ways a worst case scenario where we just assume for the next 50 years, traffic gets worse and worse every year and that there's never a turning point where things get better. But in communities that have built really successfully with good transit-oriented development, they've actually seen the traffic come down. And Arlington County is one of the best examples of that. And so that's what really needs to happen here. And I love the comments we were hearing from people in Mount Daniel. You're right. Like if you had sidewalks, X percent more people in your neighborhood would walk to metro safely and more comfortably. And that would take X number of cars off the road. So it's, it all builds on each other. This is bus routes and traffic lights and signals. So you can see the project has stop signs in many locations wherever there's pedestrian crossings. We have a few new traffic lights. So on the high school site, there's 2 new traffic lights that will be timed and sequenced with the existing lights to allow flow of cars. There's a new traffic light proposed at what is today the high school entrance, but it's going to be the entrance to the main street. And then there's a new traffic light at Falls Church Drive and the main street. And that's largely because of the number of cars coming off Route 66. That just needs to, that would be difficult to function as just a stop sign intersection. And then what you're also seeing is the bus routes. All of the bus loop routes get about 10 to 15% shorter in time. So that just takes time off the bus routes and of course makes it more likely that people would actually take the bus. There are also, and I'm sure you're aware, there's a BRT station plan for right here in front of the project. So by creating this great pedestrian and park connection all the way to the metro, it allows people to get off the BRT stop and then hop on the metro or vice versa. Or, from the development, or for you walking down a really beautiful street, get to BRT and head over to Tyson's or Alexandria. So that's also a part of the future planning. Parking real quickly. Another kind of benefit of this design, the current Lamada parking lot has about 2,000 spaces. It's fairly underutilized, as many of you probably know. When when the Silver Line opened, a lot of people just stopped driving in and parking here, and so they dropped to about, I think in the low point they were at like 700 to 900 cars per day instead of the 2,000 that used to be here. Lamada then reduced pricing at this station dramatically in order to induce more parkers, and so you now have about 11 to 1,200 parkers, but still well below the 2,000 spaces that are there today. And so the thought is, over time, Lamada can use parking management strategy. Essentially, this station should really go back to the same pricing that it was before. That will push more of those cars out towards Vienna, towards Delnoring, towards Ressens, that those cars are parking sooner and not really coming into the core and clogging up the streets and the highways as they get closer. And that would bring the station back in line with where it probably is from a demand perspective, which is about 1,000 spaces. So we are leaving 1,200 spaces in the central garage that would stay as is. We're also leaving the phase 3 land, which is about 190 spaces on an interim basis until that project gets built, so that there will be roughly 1,400 spaces here today, which is more than enough for current demand as well as some growth. And then that gives flexibility long term. So just to give you a sense of where the parking, and then the remainder of the spaces would get filled up with development. Okay, so traffic impact analysis. Kevin, we actually hadn't talked about this in advance, but why don't you, do you want to, I can either give the overview of these slides and walk through them, and then you can do commentary and interrupt me, or?
Why don't I just do it in the interest of time, since I see the hour's getting pretty late.
Go for it.
As I think was mentioned before, we'll go through in a lot more detail next time. And some of this is a little bit of review we did back in December. So I'll try and move through the first part fairly quickly. The way we do the traffic impact studies is in a layering process. The first thing we do is take existing traffic counts. Those counts were taken in 2019. Those counts are fed into a series of equations to identify what the delay for each individual movement. So if you're headed eastbound on Route 7 or southbound on Haycock to turn left on the 7, head into Falls Church, those sorts of movements conflict with one another. And so the computer models spit out delays in seconds and tenths of a second that tell us what the wait times are for those various movements. And then to that, to make it a little easier to discuss, we assign what's called a level of service. Level service A has the least amount of delay. Level service F has the most amount of delay. Typically, and in this case, level service D or better is considered an acceptable level of service. Level service E or F is unacceptable. So what this shows is the current delays and levels of service for signalized intersections in circles, all-way stop controlled intersections in the triangles, and then there's not an actual overall computation for a two-way stop where the main road continues and the side street stops. So we just show the side street approach for that in a rectangular box. What you notice, most.
Yeah, sorry.
Yep.
Just tell me when you want me to point to certain intersections or anything like that.
Will do. So what you notice is most of the letters in these boxes and the numbers are in black. That means that they're acceptable. And you can point to the big signal at 7 and Haycock. That is. Mention exceptions for concealed carry holders. However, so that's overall level of service E. And then there's a couple of side streets, Chestnut and Grove, that have one peak hour that does not operate acceptably, but for the most part, the rest does. Although some of those delays are pretty close to the border of level service E. That's existing conditions from 2019. Evan, if you go to the next slide. And the next thing we do is we add some regional traffic growth, and we add other development projects that are already approved. In this particular case, the high school site is included in the background, so that's future without development. We grew the existing traffic volumes that were reflected on the other slide by 11.56%. That's the way the math works out, compounding the growth over the years from 2019 to 2030. And so naturally traffic increases, so delays increase.
And what Kevin just said is really critical for everyone to understand. That's just kind of a underlying assumption that's used in all these traffic models, that traffic's just going to continue to get worse forever. And it's not necessarily proven out in many locations, whether it's in Bethesda or Arlington or other places. If you build good TOD, you can actually affect people's behavior and change that. But it's unfortunate, but that is how traffic studies are typically looked at.
Right. So as Evan said, the requirements of a particularly VDOT's requirements are that we include positive traffic growth, in other words, an increase in the traffic volume over that period of time. We did not take any change in the larger area. There is a reduction in the trips associated with the high school site to account for those new residents and workers utilizing the metro, but nothing in addition on the existing surrounding areas. So all of that existing traffic just continues to grow in a compounded way over time. So unsurprisingly, that makes the intersection of Haycock and 7 work worse than it does today. You'll notice that Grove goes to level service E for both time periods, or E or F for both time periods, and Great Falls also has one time period that goes to level service E. Now, the new signals shown in the orange or peach color, including the one at 7 and Chestnut, work fine, work at an acceptable level of service. Although you notice that, for instance, the Chestnut intersection, Chestnut and Commons, operates at level service D sort of right out of the gate. I wouldn't say that 10 years from now is quite right out of the gate, but it does operate at level service D because unless it's a T intersection, in other words, only one side is signalized, pretty much every intersection along a major corridor like Route 7 is going to not operate well because VDOT provides signal timings that move the main volume of traffic, that is the through traffic on the main street, around the Commonwealth to allow for the goods and services to move around the Commonwealth. That is their charge overall. And so roads like Route 7, they time with most of the green time given to the main line and with very long cycle length. It takes a while to get out onto the main line. Once you're on it, you should be able to move more depending on how well things are timed and what kind of cross traffic there is on the other streets. Sometimes that's true, sometimes that's not. So that's the reason that, for instance, you get the A, B, and C along Haycock, but you get level service D at Chestnut Commons. That's because of the way that those signals are timed on Route 7. It's different at the ramps for 66 because that's a one-legged intersection. Go ahead, Evan.
Sorry about that. I flipped to the next slide. Sorry.
Not a problem. So this is the by right. So if we add the high school site traffic and the growth to the existing and then assume the by right level of density, so no change in the comp plan for either the Lamada or the Virginia Tech sites, this is what happens. It's a little bit worse. Haycock actually goes, and 7 actually goes to a level service F in the morning, and a couple of the other delays get worse. It's not a huge difference, but it's a little bit worse. Again, adding more traffic without any major improvements makes things a little bit worse. Next one.
And one thing just to note for the folks in the Highland in the Mount Daniel neighborhood, Highland and Grove go to F, similar to what Kevin was just mentioning, because on Route 7, the cycle time really goes for Route 7, and that's where the cars get priority. It gets harder to make a left out at some intersections unless there's a traffic light for you as well. With the flow of cars on Haycock during peak hour, rush hour, it's hard, as you know, to make left turns out because there's cars coming in. And so the intersection fails. That doesn't mean you have a lot more cars. It just means you're waiting longer to make a left turn out.
Correct.
Sorry, this is David. Since you're, Evan and Kevin, since you're talking about Highland, I'm trying to notice this last slide then is if Lamada develops by right, correct?
That's right.
And so I'm sorry, the first letter is peak and the second is non-peak. Is that what it is?
Sorry, I should have mentioned that to begin with. The first letter is the AM peak, so the 1 hour period that is the highest traffic volume for the system in the morning, and then the second is the 1 hour peak in the afternoon.
Okay.
Give me just a second. I'll tell you exactly what times. Really should have that memorized, but
Well, I don't know that matters exactly. We understand the principle. I wouldn't spend a lot of time looking that up.
Yep. Sorry, I thought I had
just so I understand. That's right. Thank you for clarifying that. So could you explain to me?
Yeah. So the next one is unmitigated. I'm sorry, Dave. Did you have something else?
Yeah, I did want to, if I just quickly, I don't want to hold you up too long, but I'm curious about the fact that Highland in the morning seems to do worse in all three of these scenarios when there's development by right. It does worse than it does. I mean, right now it's DC, right? Then in the future, assuming the what second scenario is if the Lamada development goes forward with plan amendments. Is that correct?
No. So we haven't gotten to that yet, David. So
all right. So the second one is just the second one is just if the city builds, but Lamada does nothing. Is that right?
No. So Kevin, sorry, I'll go back and just walk people through them again because there's 6 or 7 slides we're going to look at. So first is existing conditions. So today, that's where you're at. You're at a D and an E on Grove and a D and C on Highland. That's existing conditions. Future without any development on Lamada, Virginia Tech.
Right.
This includes the high school site and includes a 1% growth factor per year for background traffic. Your intersections start failing just based on that, even if nothing happens at Lamada and Virginia Tech.
This is like a no-build scenario for.
This is a no-build scenario, exactly.
Okay.
And the next one is adding the by right development, right? If there were no comp plan change, but somebody built 700 apartments, 50,000 feet of retail, and a few 100,000 feet of commercial on the Virginia Tech site, essentially gets worse because nothing's been mitigated yet. And then now we'll get into future with Lamada and Virginia Tech.
All right, thank you.
But with no mitigations. And so you'll see this is, of course, the worst that you're going to see on all the slides, where a lot of things fail. The Route 7 and Aycock fails. The Great Falls intersection starts failing. Your intersections start failing. Even some intersections within the development go to E, which is typically acceptable for urban areas. But the point is, without any mitigations, things get worse. So sorry, I interrupted you, Kevin.
That's actually the whole purpose of this slide is, so one of the things we certainly look at is if we have the traffic and we don't make any changes to the road network, what happened? What needs to be fixed? What improvements could we make? And certainly all of this would look much worse if it wasn't for the new ability to turn left into Chestnut. So from eastbound Route 7, turn left into Chestnut. Evan, if you want to trace these things as I talk about them, turn left out from the Commons to Route 7 to continue eastbound. And then, as you pointed out earlier, Evan, the ramp connection between ramps A and B at the Route 7 I-66 interchange takes like 300 cars out of the Route 7 Haycock intersection on some of the highest conflicting movements that there are. So without those, these would look worse, but we went through and tried to fix that. And here's
can I stop you just a second, Kevin, just to make sure I understand. So this scenario assumes that the Lamada development would be built under a change in the comp plan, but with no mitigation. But with no mitigation. Okay.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and what we can do, Kevin, maybe before we send these to the Transit Task Force, instead of just the one header, we'll do like a bullet point, David. So on each of the slides, you'll have
Okay.
a little bit more detail about what you're looking at.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so then let's go towards mitigation. So we've, so Kevin talked about this. We've recommended some mitigations to FCDOT, which we just submitted and it's under review.
Right. And Evan, remind me, do we have a slide showing the mitigation measures? I don't want to go to it yet. Let's talk about this, but if
yes, we do.
Yeah. Okay.
I couldn't remember, but yes, we do.
So that'll be easier to talk about. So we'll go through the specific mitigation here in a minute, but it involves changes to the Route 7 Haycock intersection. It involves changes to the Great Falls and Haycock intersection, and some changes within the site to the traffic controls. And because of that, what we're able to do is balance out the traffic, for instance, between the Chestnut and, or rather Commons and Haycock exits to get back onto 7, and really just balance everything out. You'll actually notice that Commons/Chestnut, the orange circle on the left side, actually works better than it does under the no development scenario. It's level service C, because again, we've been able to take more traffic out of that intersection, balance it better with Haycock. So we'll go over those improvements in a minute. The one thing that is tough to fix is those two-way stop control, side street stop control intersections. See that there's one internal to the site near the Virginia Tech site. That is the reason for that is we've got that extra 300 cars coming through that roadway because of the new ramp connection at I-66. But there's not quite enough traffic to put a signal there. So that occurs during the peak hour, and that's about it. The rest of the time, there's more than enough roadway capacity. If we look at the volume that's being moved through there, there's enough capacity. Along Grove and Highland, the same thing holds. There's those locations are a little close to the signal at the Metro Access Drive in order to put a signal there, and they don't necessarily have enough traffic on their own. They're sort of in that bad gray area of having some traffic and having some delays, but not enough to have a signal on their own. There's a federal guideline that requires a specific set of parameters in order to install a traffic signal, and we looked at that preliminarily. Highland does not meet that. Grove might meet one of those warrants for signalization, but again, it's really close to make that happen. And if in fact the RTAP program that Bob was talking about finds that there's a cut-through problem, that may or may not be sort of the right solution. So that is one of the pieces that I guess we still need to discuss as a larger overall thing. But as Bob mentioned, a lot of that, if there's cut through, that's and or speeding, that's definitely in the realm of what the RTAP should take care of. In the
I'm sorry, just to clarify on the Highland Avenue thing, the what's been requested is traffic calming measures, and I was originally told from Supervisor Faust's office that it would not qualify for cut through, but after the meeting yesterday that we had on that, it looked like possibly staff would go back and look at that. But as of right now, the only thing that's being proposed there is a speed bump on the upslope of Highland from Haycock, like between Haycock and the next street, which is Mount Daniel Drive. That's the only thing they've proposed. We're at the stage where they have to meet with the task force and all on it. But this is not a situation where right now the traffic study is promising to deal with cut through traffic.
Yeah, and so let's get back to that in a second, and I appreciate that. We just found that out today as well. The overall, what you're looking at though is, whether it's the Haycock and 7 intersection, which is, astonishingly getting to a level service D, which is better than existing today. So that's less wait time than you currently use at that intersection, even with all the development and with the background development. Same with Great Falls, that intersection is improved. All these other intersections along the way, most of them are better than they are today under existing, or certainly better with background. So the good news is it's a story for, where because of the grid of streets that we're creating to provide the access to the metro, and because we're providing a grid which allows cars to go in different directions, you're actually able to actually solve some of the traffic issues for the community. And then the next step is, thinking with the county about Grove and Highland, what can you do on those streets to deflect cut through traffic to make it so that cars aren't cutting through your neighborhood? And then what could be done to make it easier to get lefts in or lefts out of your community? And so that should be kind of a next phase that we can start talking about. But the overall traffic picture is actually much better than even existing today, which is good.
Right. So you want to look at how we make that happen? There you go. Okay. So this we've turned the north arrow a little bit. So this is Route 7 across left to right on the screen, Shreve at the bottom of the screen, and Haycock going off the north side. And in order to improve things, we've built on what's happening at the Chestnut Commons intersection. Certainly utilized that as an improvement, and then continued on. So what we've done is reclaim a little bit of the middle of the road space that's on the left side or the west side of Haycock and Shreve, and put a median in there, and that's a little bit wider than it is today. And the reason we can do that is because of the ramp improvement and the additional left turn at Commons, across from Chestnut. And so really the volume that the ramp carries is equivalent to VDOT's guidance on having 2 left turn lanes. So really we should be able to take both left turn lanes away. Don't know how you quite do that, but really the amount of traffic that we're removing from the Haycock intersection is worth 2+ lanes in terms of the ability to carry it through there. So we only really need a single left. We've done that, changed around the way that the signal works a little bit to take advantage of that. In the westbound direction, so on the east leg of the intersection, we've modified it a little bit to take advantage of that extra space that we're creating with the left turn lane in the median. And then on the north leg, the Haycock leg, we've also gone into the median to make an additional lane. So we have now a left 2 throughs and a right turn lane, as opposed to having one of each, a left, a through, and right. So that all of that allows, with not really any expansion of the roadway footprint itself. So it's still as compact as it can be for pedestrian crossings and having the buildings up on the streets and all of those things that you want to see in a more urbanized area. It allows for a little bit more space for the cars to move, and it actually matches the west and east legs of the intersection up so that it's much more efficient in terms of the use of the traffic. All of those.
Excuse me, Kevin?
Yes.
And Evan? I think we need to hold off on this kind of discussion because one, the county has not seen this intersection per se. This is all new to us tonight. And we've also heard from VDOT that maintaining dual lefts at Haycock is a priority for them. So you're talking about things that we have not reviewed at the county yet, and this is all new information, and it's just like we need to have a discussion about this before we go any further.
Right.
Because there are things that have not been approved yet by VDOT, and they still have to do their review of the traffic analysis. So these mitigation options, may not even come to fruition until the state engineer signs off.
Got it.
I also just want to jump in, everyone. It's 9:15. So already a little bit past the time. I'm not sure how much more you're
This is
planning
the
on
last.
presenting. We were.
Yeah, this is the last slide. So just to close out, thanks, Bob, for jumping in. What I'll say is this. So this is our recommended mitigation as part of what we've submitted to the county for review and for VDOT for review. It's clearly better from a traffic perspective. And then the county needs to study the options and obviously figure out what is approvable. And then just for what I think the task force just needs to be aware of, there are a lot of existing constraints at this intersection. And so, if, you could get rid of 8 feet along all of Federal Realty's property, then you could make this intersection work and let VDOT keep 2 left turn lanes, even though it's not needed. But it just, the existing constraints, if the goal is to solve traffic, this really is the solution that works. And then if not, if we have to retain the 2 lanes, then some of the intersections, they just don't get to the D, they end up being E's, which isn't the end of the world, but it's not quite as good as we can do. So that's it.
Right. And if I could just real quick partially answer Bob's question, there is actually another option in the traffic study that maintains second left turn lane, because we did hear VDOT loud and clear on that, so that those 2 things can be compared side by side by staff, because we do understand that direction.
Yeah, and our assumption is once they see both and see the numbers, they'll agree that this is a more logical approach. The takeaways, I'll skip this because excuse me, in the interest of time, but this was our last slide. We were just going to talk about some of the benefits of the plan, including affordable housing at 15%, which is huge, open space, bike lanes, reduced congestion, the buffer. So there's really some great benefits with almost no additional density at these metro stations. And then clearly some mitigations on noise, light, and traffic. And that's it. That's the presentation.
Thank you both. This is David. I know we don't want to take a lot more time. Is there anybody else on the task force who wishes to add anything or ask any questions on this? I'm not seeing any hands. Brian, do we have an opportunity for
Darren's hand is raised
from outside? I'm sorry, who's?
Darren's.
Oh yes, Darren, go ahead.
So just one question for Evan. You had a circulator slide that had the buses, but it also had pedestrian and cars. I think it's going back now about 6 or 7 slides.
Yep.
And so my question was to that one, if we can find it here real quick. And that's predominantly on the Lamada site. I believe that my question revolves around.
Not that one. Hold on. I know which one. I know the one you're talking about.
Yeah, it's fine. Take your time.
It's right here. There we go. Next one. Sorry. There.
Is that the one? There it is, right there. Okay, so the bus is in the dark. I can't tell if it's a blue or purple, whatever.
Yep.
And that's the point in question here is on the southern portion here, where it's straight. That actually has interparcel connection.
Uh-huh.
Along that is just give me a quick. That's a 2 lanes each way, so 4 lane kind of a boulevard there. And it's got retail on the ground level. What's going on in that activated part of this? My question revolves around the interaction with the buses looping through that site. If I've got pedestrians and bicyclists and and so forth, and then folks trying to dine, et cetera, in cafes with these big buses and all kinds of other modes, multimodal going through there.
Yeah, it's a great question, Darren. So the slide that I was showing before was only the Lamada site. The lion's share of what the activity you're talking about, the outdoor dining, retail activity, is here. So the buses don't go on that street.
Where's here?
Oh, sorry. Can you see my mouse?
No.
No, I don't think we've ever really been able to see your mouse. At least I haven't.
Oh, really? Oh no, this whole
I didn't want to say anything, but I never did see your mouse. Not me. Anyway.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I've been pointing all these things out while I've been talking. I assumed you guys could see my mouse. Okay. So Darren, I'm going to try to describe this the best way I can. So, so there's the 3 parcels, right? The high school site, Virginia Tech, and then Lamada. On the high school site and Virginia Tech is really the heart of the double-sided retail main street with the big park in the middle, where there'll be outdoor dining and all the stuff you're talking about. When you transition to Lamada, there will still be some retail. It'll be more service-oriented, more residential in character. And that's where the buses would be on the main street. So the buses don't go on the portion of the main street where you have kind of the hustle bustle crazy activity. They're on what would be a little bit of a quieter part of the main street where it goes off towards the metro. So
but you're still going to have bicyclists and people walking. So there's going to be a conflict with the buses there. And if you just jump back to that slide that we had, because I'm most concerned with the buses. And is this the only circulation that's available for these buses is to go along that route? It's just that we're trying to encourage folks, and I know there's a lot of bus activity now, and I just that interference almost, if you will, between non-motorized and motorized, particularly large buses, is always problematic.
Yeah, so it's a good question too. So there's 3 bus lines, and they come about every 20 minutes on average, like in total. So
but you've also got other businesses that are driving in and out of there with their their mini buses. I mean, there's a lot of even now you got cabs. So there's it's not just Metro, although they represent the biggest ones. There could be even tour buses, all kinds of. It's just that interaction that on that street is what concerns me.
Yeah, so that is the intent. The idea is that you have separated bike lanes. So that's the bikes have their safe space. You then have, the one direction the buses are going, which is in this direction. Sorry, you can't see my mouse, but in the direction towards the top of the page, that lane will be designed to make sure that it handles buses appropriately. And then you have broad sidewalks with tree pits separating the pedestrians from the street edge, as well as cars. So there's the type of urban streetscape you'd have, all throughout DC, where you have buses and pedestrians and bikes mixing. And it's a street with stop signs.
Do you have an elevation view available on that slide, or will you at some point in the near future?
Yeah,
okay.
We can, if you'd like, since given the time, we can focus on this, and then at the October meeting, really dig in, and even but before the October meeting, we can do a call with you and walk you through it.
Cool.
Yep, we're happy to do that.
Thank you.
But is this presentation on the webpage?
It can be, yes. I think we typically do share it with staff.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not yet, but we will be posting it on the webpage. And I'll email it to the task force once we post it.
Do we have any other questions for anybody on the task force? Do we have a chance to take questions from attendees not on the task force, late though it is?
I think I've only seen one additional hand up.
Yeah, and that's from a long time ago. Yeah, Ed, are you still here? Can you still have a question? If you can unmute yourself.
I can unmute.
Okay. Can you unmute him?
You're unmuted.
Ed, are you there? Ed?
Hello?
Hello,
yeah.
Is this Ed?
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, so this is Dan Lee speaking on behalf of our family. Maybe Ed can jump in later. Thank you for providing all these informations in this 2.5-hour session. There's a lot of discussion, a lot of information provided, and I understand that this is a very diverse meeting and a lot of demands from people trying to understand this very complicated project. But I think we speak for some of the concerned community members about these upcoming change of the plan. I think Brian provided some useful information in his last slide about the substantive changes, and that's definitely a slide we want to take a picture of and pour over, and then moving on to Mr. Goldman's presentation. I was excited to see the titles being comprehensive plan amendment, understanding that the focus will be the keyword is comprehensive. The change will be in your word comprehensive, but actually also to us very, very substantial and very, very big and very, very important. I would appreciate a little bit more focus on what's in the change, and because you did, I think it was mentioned that some of the density measure will go from 0.5 to 2.5, a 5 times change, even though Mr. Goldman, you said that it's a little change, but I'm not an expert in this. I personally think that this is a gigantic change in my own mind, and I would appreciate a little bit more discussion about, why the change and what's the impact. Particularly, there's also a missing discussion about why, right? There was a original plan that's being approved by the community, and now we're changing the plan. There hasn't been much discussion about why is there a 2-step process? Is this typical? But it seems that you mentioned that there are other development that's upscaled.
Overall, we think it's getting larger and larger.
Can I just break in for 1 second? I was just going to
You
say,
mentioned that there are other projects upscaled 10 times. Is this a common practice to do it 2 steps, or like what's the thinking behind that?
yeah, so I'd love to, probably the best thing to do, because there's been about 10 or 12 task force meetings over the last year on the subject. So a lot of the questions you're asking are things that we've talked about over the last year. Can you contact me? Can I give you my email or my cell phone number, and I can set up time and walk you through it? I'm happy to spend as much time as you'd like, and I can go through kind of all the background and the justification and how we got to this place, because there's been a lot of thought put into it. But my
that would be helpful.
Yeah, we'd be happy to talk to you about it, and also if there are informations to be shared with the community, maybe a little bit less on the detail, but more on the big picture changes.
Yeah, we think a nice, current state, future state. Just focus on that. Probably at the beginning of the meeting, I think would be very useful time.
Excellent. So Brian, do you have their contact information? Can you send them an email with my email address and put us in touch with each other? Or
Evan, I could do that. Dan and
Thanks, David.
Ed are in my neighborhood and on my list, so I can send you that contact information. Let me just do that. And both of you, I know you don't always get an opportunity to go to attend these meetings. I know Ed has sometimes done it, but a lot of this stuff has been discussed at earlier meetings, and it will be going over a lot of the stuff that's been kind of covered. But I will, I'll just send you, I'll try to send you Evan's email address tomorrow if you have questions. And if you want, I'll try to answer some of them.
Okay.
Apologize if this has been discussed, but also I think it will be very helpful if the community can be informed about what their options are currently and what's the timeline for their options. That'll also be very useful.
Yeah, because I remember
that is sort of my job. I mean, because I'm Jay's, because we're representing our community on the task force, and we'll try to get you that information. I have not mobilized the community much yet because I wanted to make sure there was a lot more traffic information before.
Because I remember the earlier meetings. This was a lot smaller, and so yeah, the original plan when you first started. Yeah.
But there are reasons for this, and it's late, so we really can't go into it again now. I will give you Evan's email, and if you put these questions in an email to him and copy me, we'll try to make sure we get answers for you.
Okay.
David, we ready to adjourn?
I think so. I mean, I see a couple more hands up, but I don't know if you want to take them.
I think we have, I see Robin and Nancy spoken before. Stuart hasn't. I'm okay with allowing one more.
Okay, Stuart, are you still there?
I can unmute.
Okay.
Yes, still here. Quick question on the traffic, and I'm Stuart Schwartz from Coalition for Smart Growth. Did you measure as part of your analysis the level of internal capture you'll get from the mix of uses? And are you also, have you seen, and maybe for Evan, from experience from the marketing, the demographics, the people who choose to live in these walkable urban places near transit, much lower levels of car ownership and vehicle travel such that it might mitigate the level of traffic as compared to the by right level of development?
Yeah, Kevin, why don't you talk about the actual mode split we assumed for the development sites, which I think is lower than you traditionally would assume for a site that's going to be this mixed use. But Kevin, why don't you talk about that, and then I can address examples of it. Yeah.
Yeah, so the mode split, which is combination of just pure ridership as well as TDM, transportation demand management strategies. Usually the way VDOT asks us to do that in these types of studies is to lump those together. We took that at 45% for the scoping discussions. That is the only reduction that we have for the trip generation. In other words, if you built a series of townhomes out in the middle of nowhere, you would have 10 trips associated with those. We took 50, instead of 10, we took 6 trips associated with them for their presence here, vehicular trips. Here, associated with the internal capture, although that's not specifically what it was designed to measure, but then mostly the mode split, people riding on metro or buses, and then TDM measures, people riding together, ride sharing to work in another place that's not served by transit, and biking and walking. So all of the non-auto mode share together is 45%. We did not, on top of that, take an internal reduction between the uses, although for a compact mix of uses like this, one would absolutely expect to have that. So therefore, the traffic study is conservative in that manner, and actually over projects how many trips are going to be on the road network in cars.
It's a great answer. And for those of you who don't quite understand what's being stated there that aren't traffic engineers, imagine today you drive to Mosaic to go to dinner, right? So you're driving to Mosaic, have dinner on a Friday night or a Thursday night, whatever it may be. In the future, because there's now a mixed use development closer to your home, there are a whole bunch of cars that would normally be driving through this site, or people living on the site who would have been going to, let's say, Mosaic for dinner, or folks like yourselves who would be going there for dinner, who will now drive a shorter trip, or if you live on site, actually internal capture, not drive at all because they'll just walk to the restaurant. And that kind of gets lost in the math. That's not accounted for as part of the data, but it clearly takes cars off the road, both by shortening trips as well as by getting the cars off the road. And then for a sense of scale too, on the high school site, I think the traffic's we only assumed a 35% mode split, if I remember correctly, which for a site of that level of density and proximity to metro is low. At Pike and Rose, Stuart, which I know you're familiar with, we were at 50% in that project, and that's more typical of metro station policy areas with high density of this level. And then there's no credit given for the amount of people surrounding the neighborhood who will take shorter trips or choose to do metro as an increase of who do it today, which clearly there will be an increase. So yeah, so it's a fairly conservative model, that as well as the 11% growth in traffic, which completely kills the model to begin with. You know, kind of, it almost sets you up for failure from a traffic impact study perspective, which is one of the hardest things about development. And it's a kind of a vestige of a time when adequate public facilities were kind of used as a way to stop development for, you know, other people coming to their neighborhoods. And so, you know, that just hasn't changed yet from a policy perspective.
Right. And I'm sorry, I'm going to correct one thing that I said. We did not take an internal capture, so an interaction between the residential and office, for instance, that is above and beyond the very low numbers that VDOT allows us to use. So it's only 5%. So that it actually is in there, but out of the large amount of uses here, we're talking about taking 2 or 4 trips off of particular interactions. Very, very low numbers. We would expect to see much higher than that in practice, but VDOT only lets us take a very small amount. So we have it.
Oh, we beat that horse. Thank you all for allowing us to talk for so long. I apologize. I know it was been a long night, but it's a lot of meaty stuff. So hopefully this was useful for folks.
Yeah, thank you, Evan, and thank you, Kevin. I think we're probably ready to call it quits, Brian, don't you?
Yeah, I think so. I just want to know our next meeting will be in October, the 3rd Tuesday as per normal. October 20th at 7 p.m. We'll be posting the meeting information online, and if you've indicated in the past that you want updates, if you're a member of the public, we'll send that to you. And if, of course, we'll send any information along to the task force. Tonight's presentations will be posted online in terms of both the slides and a video of the presentation. And if in the meantime, if any of you have any questions, you can please feel free to email me. I will briefly put my email address up on the screen. Brian.boteo@fairfaxcounty.gov. David, is there anything else you'd like to say before we depart for the evening?
I don't think so. Thank you very much for everything.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great night.
Thank you.